Welcome to the Arabesque Sewing Studio. Now I'm excited to share with you my next pattern today. This is the Focus Finder. Now the Focus Finder is a pattern to sew a cover for a scratch pad or a to-do list. So if you're someone who loves writing menus, to-do lists and shopping lists, then this is the perfect pattern for you. Now I've written this pattern for a couple of reasons. Firstly, lists have been a huge part of transforming my life because when I can write a list, I get that noise and clutter of tasks out of my head and down on paper where I can sort them out. Now, I'm not anti-technology, but I do love to at least start my planning away from my phone where distractions are reduced and I can simply focus on writing my list and organising my priorities. Now the second reason I wrote this pattern is because I love stationery, and if you love stationery too, then this pattern gives you the opportunity to sew your own stationery. Now let's have a closer look at this design. So this cover's held shut with a handy snap closure which keeps everything neat and tidy. When we open it up, you can see there's a slot to hold your pen, so you're never caught without your pen when you're writing your list. Then we have a slot that holds your notepad securely, and on this side we've got two pockets. There's a handy card pocket for holding a rewards card when you're out shopping, and a slip pocket which is great for receipts and maybe stickers. And we have our really handy carry strap which makes it great for travelling and taking out on the go. And because this is a nice slimline design, it's great for popping in your handbag and taking shopping with you. Now the Focus Finder pattern comes in two sizes. This is the standard size. So this holds a pad up to 4 inches by 8 1/4 inches or a standard size DL. And we also have a taller size that holds nice tall notepads. So if you would like a nice long list, you can write that as well. So you can find pads for this at Kmart and Coles in Australia, and also in America they're available at Walmart and also at many online retailers like Amazon and Etsy. There's lots of pretty ones. So I'll be linking to all these notepads in the description below. Now I'm rating this pattern as a confident beginner. So if you've got several projects under your belt and you would like to make this, then you're going to have no problem sewing this. But if you are a complete newbie, then I'd love you to follow my tutorial along because I'll be sharing all the skills that you need to be able to make this and be happy with your result. The important thing to remember is we're trying to emulate the look of stationery here. So I'm advocating for accuracy at each step because we want straight edges, pointy corners, and straight stitching to achieve a really polished look so that we can get that stationery effect. So if you've got a spare 3.5 hours or so, I invite you to spend an afternoon sewing along with me. So grab your supplies and your pattern, which are linked in the description below, and we'll get started. I'm just going to run through all the things that you're going to need. And today I'm going to be demonstrating how to make the standard size or the default version in the pattern. So if you're going to be making the larger one, you're going to be just following the instructions for that, and you're going to need a little bit more fabric than I'm showing you here. Now I've got a bundle of fabric here which is a little bit different to what the pattern calls for, and this is because I want to show you a scrappy version for this today. So I really recommend that you raid your scrap bins for this project because none of the pieces for this pattern are very big, and this is perfect for just pulling out all your favorite fabrics that you've been saving for something special. So I'll run through the fabric I've got here in a minute, but in the meantime I'll just go through the interfacing. So we're going to be backing the cotton woven fabric that we've got with a 20 inch by 20 inch piece of woven fusible interfacing. This is SF101, so you can substitute this with any medium woven interfacing, and this just stops your cotton fabric from stretching, gives it some structure, and it doesn't change the texture of the fabric. So that's what I love about this. So you're also going to need a 5" by 20" piece of heavy interfacing. So this is Pellon Peltex, and you can use this in non-fusible or fusible or even double-sided fusible. It really depends on what you've got. Any of those will work. And this is just going to give the cover that extra stable cardboard-like quality. So that goes in after we've actually sewn the project. We're also going to need one cam snap set. So this is a size 20, and you're going to need a male one, a female one, and 2 caps. You're going to need a 1/2" D-ring and a small swivel clip. And you're going to need 2 inches of 1/2" wide flat elastic. So I've got a fold over elastic here. And the reason I love this is because it comes in many colours, which you can coordinate with your project, and it has that lovely shiny quality. So you can use any flat elastic that you've got, but if you've got some of this, it just looks really pretty with it. I also recommend having some binding clips on hand, which are just great when you're holding lots of thick fabric layers together. I love using a lighter for burning my thread ends. So if you're using polyester thread, this is just great for tidying up those little tails. I love cutting this project out with a rotary cutter and a ruler, because I just think you can't beat the precision of being able to have perfectly straight edges. You can of course use scissors, that's totally up to you. I've got some glue for glue basting here, and I'm using a fine line glue tip, which just dispenses a really tiny amount of glue and is really great when you can't use a pin. I've got some really small pointy fabric scissors here, which are great for trimming very closely. I've got some paper scissors here for cutting out your template, because you don't want to be cutting paper out with your best fabric scissors. I've got some larger fabric scissors here just for trimming around the ends and the corners of my fabric that I can't do with a rotary cutter. Got a tool for setting the cam snap and an awl for poking the hole for the cam snap. And I also love to use this to get in very close to the needle on the sewing machine and just help hold those layers together if needed. I've got some fabric safe markers for marking my fabric. And lastly, I've got a couple of tools for pushing out the corners and the points and scoring the seams. And I can't emphasize enough with this project that even though this is actually very simply constructed, you do need to be really accurate with your cutting, your pressing, and just finishing off all the edges to make sure everything turns out nice and square. Because what we're trying to emulate here is a piece of stationery that has right angles and straight edges. And if you're a little bit sloppy with some of these steps, then you're not going to get a nice crisp look to your project. So I thought I'd just run through the fabric that I've chosen for this and explain just the way to get a really nice look to this project. So the front cover here really lends itself to a pretty large, bold print. And this is where I love to just put something really fun and bright and quite large scale on the front. Then I'm going to use this quite tiny stripe for the spine of the project, and this will go on the inside and the outside. This is going to be used for my internal pockets. So I love to use a graphic or grid shape print for this, and this just really helps the pockets actually look like a piece of paper, because it's not too busy and it has some nice lines that lead your eye down the pocket and just let you envisage the fact that this is like a piece of paper. Now inside I'm going to use a solid, and while you can see this actually has some pattern to it, it reads as a solid and it's got a little bit of grunge on it, so it also sort of looks a little bit paperish. And then I've got a really tiny little floral, and I'm going to be making my strap and my closure flap and my D-ring loop out of this, and this just gives a little bit of difference in scale and a little cute touch that is going to look really sweet at the end. So you're going to go ahead and cut out all of the pieces from the cutting table, and you're going to need to cut some of your pieces from the templates. So that means you need to print out your template sheet and make sure that you have selected full size or 100% for your printing size, and that there's no scaling turned on. So this is really important part of printing out the templates at the correct size, because if they're not right, then that's going to affect how they fit the project. So the way to check that you've got the right size is to measure your scale square that I've given you here. So you need to do this by putting your ruler on top of the scale square, and you know that it's the right size when you can't see any of the lines of the scale square underneath your ruler. It should be completely hidden by the lines that are already there. So when you can't see them, that's a proper 1 inch by 1 inch square. So we don't recommend printing from your phone or your iPad, because there's no option for printing at 100%, and typically this will end up with your templates not being the right size. So the one thing that I'm going to cut out that's left is this rounded corner template. I've designed this project just to have some very, very minorly rounded corners, and the reason for that is if we made this with pointy corners or right angled corners, what you tend to find is you just have a very slight bunny ear effect on the project. And so because we're trying to go for a stationary paper type feel to this, I've decided just to round those corners just a little tiny bit, just to help everything, the corners just pull in very nicely. So this is my exterior front and back. So I've got 2 pieces of interfacing cut from the chart for that, and I've got a front and a back interior cover as well, and interfacing to go with it. I've got an insert piece. So this is the piece that's going to hold the notepad when it's inside, and this is the interfacing that goes with that. I've got 2 spines and 2 spine interfacings. Then I've got my pockets. So with these pockets, these are constructed with 2 pieces of fabric sewn right sides together and then turned right sides out. So what you need to do when you cut this is to make sure you cut one with the fabric facing you, and then flip the template over and cut one in reverse. And that needs to happen for the interfacing as well. So make sure you're cutting your second piece in reverse, and the same for this slip pocket as well. And the last little bits we've got, I've got the D-ring loop, I've got the closure loop, and I've got the carry snap here. So that's all the pieces, and I'm just going to grab the interfacing for the interior and exterior covers. So you just want to lay these out in pairs, and what we're going to be doing is rounding the 2 outer corners on each pair. So you just want to grab your fabric pen and align this to the corner. Now when I do this, I actually like to just set this edge in about 1 millimeter from the edges of the fabric, and that just lets you put your pen around the corner just a little bit more, and just helps you draw that corner just a little bit easier. So then I'm just going to round the second corner here. So when you do this, make sure you're paying attention so that you're only rounding 2 of the corners, one of the top short corners and one of the bottom short corners. So I'm going to go ahead and do this on this piece and on this pair as well. So then just go and trim off all 8 of these corners. So now just grab your iron, and you're going to fuse the interfacing to the wrong sides of each piece of fabric. So I've got my interior covers here. So you're just going to grab the interfacing for this and center that, just eyeball it, within the seam allowance, and then make sure that this piece has the rounded corners facing to the outside as well. So each of these are on the outside. Get it as straight as you can and as centered as you can. And then just take your iron and give it a really good press. And I do recommend putting the iron on there and holding it down and pressing quite hard. And then as you move up the piece, I don't recommend just pushing all the way down, because it will push it out of the level of the seam allowance. So then I move down to the bottom, and then you can move along and just make sure that it's fused. And take your time with this, because you really want this to stick really, really well. So then I like to flip it over. I'm going to go and add a bit more steam to this iron in a minute. So just double check that that is stuck really, really well. And then you can set this aside and keep fusing the other pieces. So then you're going to take your outer front and outer back and lay them right sides up, and make sure that you have those curved corners facing towards the outside. And take your spine and lay that in the middle. And we're going to take the spine and flip it so that it's right sides together along this long right hand edge. And we're going to take this to the sewing machine and stitch down this right hand side with a 3/8 seam allowance. So just follow along the edge of the interfacing there, and make sure to backstitch at the beginning and end. Then we're going to press the seam towards the cover, and then we're going to sew this edge onto the outer front and press the seam towards the front. So I like to press each of these while the project is shut, or the seam is still just the way you've sewn it, and then open it out and make sure each of these seams are facing towards the exterior cover. But I do make sure that I press as accurately and as flat as I can, because each of these seams, the straighter that you can get it and the smoother that you can get it, the better your project will look in the end. And we're going to grab the insert and the interfacing that goes with that. So grab your fabric pen and your ruler, and on the wrong side of the insert we're going to measure and mark 2 inches down from each of the short edges. So just mark a line right along there on each end. Now take the interfacing, and with the sticky side down, you're going to center that between the 2 long edges and line it up with the marked lines that you've just marked. So holding that in place, I'm just going to fuse that. Now we're going to fold this edge right along the edge of that interfacing there, and press that, and then just flip this, just feel the edge of that interfacing with your fingernail there, and press this under to the wrong side as well. So now we're going to be top stitching 1/4 of an inch away from each of these short edges. So I'm just going to glue base my edges down here. I'm just running a very, very narrow band of glue along there, along each of these edges, and then just set that in place to dry it, so that when you stitch that doesn't gum up your needle. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch away from each of these raw edges, remembering that this is going to show on this side. So now you're going to grab your inner back and just check that you have your rounded edges. It's still facing on the outside of this. And you're going to grab your insert and we're going to mark on the back where this is going to lay. So with your ruler and your marking pen, you're going to mark 3/4 of an inch down from the top edge and 3 inches up from the bottom edge. So just check again that you've got it the right way up. So you're going to take the top edge of this insert and lay this level with this line. Then we're going to clip this in place down the edge. Now you might find that your bottom of your insert is just a fraction longer than your marked line. That's okay, but what we're aiming for is a consistent straight edge here. So I am finding that this is always surprisingly harder than it looks to get this straight, because if you stitch down one side and then flip it around and up the other, it will tend to skew. So what we're going to do for this particular method of attaching it is to prevent the skewing. I like to take it to the sewing machine and stitch down this side, and then without flipping it, I'm also going to stitch down this side. So that just avoids the skewing that can happen. So let's take this to the sewing machine and we're going to baste this in place at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So then just give this a really good press and just have a look at it and check that you are happy with this edge and this edge looking nice and straight. So now you're going to lay this so this is on the right side and your left inner front is going to be on the left side. Just checking those corners. Grab your spine and place that in the middle again. And then we're going to repeat sewing the spine right sides together along the inner right hand edge. And this time when we press these seams, we're going to press these towards the spine. So we're going to stitch down here at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then I am going to trim these seams, and when I stitch it here, I'm going to trim it and then press towards the spine. So now we're going to set this inside aside and we're going to work on constructing the card pockets. Take the card pocket and place them right sides together. So just double check that you have your little notch here back to back with the notch on the other side, and your curved corner here back to back with the opposite side. So just put a few clips around here just to hold these together. Now I like to start and stop this along this bottom edge here. So I'm going to allow about 2.5 inches along here for turning this right sides out. So I'm just going to get this one ready as well. So this is the slip pocket. So make sure you've got these right sides together. So just clip these together. Now, one thing I have found with using woven interfacing is that there are lots of different brands out there, and they're all a little bit different in their weight and in their weave. And so you might find that your interfacing shifts a little bit when you iron it on your fabric. So one of the things that you can do here, if you are not confident that your interfacing is in the right place anymore, you can actually take your template, place it back on top of your interfacing again, and just redraw that little curve and maybe even some of the edges, and just center that again as best you can. So I'm going to mark a little opening for myself here, just along the bottom of the card slot pocket of about 2.5 inches again. And you'd be surprised, you might think, I don't need to mark that opening, but the number of times that I actually sew the whole thing up if I don't mark it is incredible. So do yourself a favour and mark this little opening. So now we're going to take both of these pockets to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch starting from this little mark all the way around. Follow that little notched edge and the little curve until you get back to the beginning, and then I'll meet you back here. Now give both of your pockets here a press. This also just doubly helps to set that interfacing back in place. So now I'm going to trim these seams down. So I'm going to trim this seam down by about half, but I'm going to leave the seam full width across the opening. So just start just in from where you've stitched and trim that down. When you get to a corner, you're going to snip that corner off on the diagonal, making sure not to snip your stitches. And I'm going to carve out a little niche here for the little notch. And I'm going to notch just around that curve with my scissors every couple of millimeters, and I'm also going to trim off the corners as well. So just go ahead and trim off the rest of the seam around the raw edges, and then just taper that off just before you get to where your opening is, so you've got a longer piece open here. So just repeat that for the second pocket. So now we're going to turn this right sides out. So just carefully start pulling this and pushing this through the opening that you've got here. Just being careful not to tug on those stitches too much, because we don't want to make a rip in this opening. Just take your time here and wiggle it all through, and then reach in with your fingers, and you're going to push out those corners as best as you can. That notch, just make it as defined as you can get, and then we're going to reach in with either our knitting needle, or if you're game, a pair of scissors. I've always done this with the point of my scissors, sometimes to my detriment, but if you're careful you can reach in and just carefully poke those corners out until you're happy with the shape that they are. Looking really nice here. Now the secret to getting this looking nice and straight across the edge is to just play with this opening a little bit. So what I usually like to do is actually press it up before I turn it right sides out, but actually having this fabric with the straight lines on it actually is going to make it a little bit easier to do, so I'm going to be able to finger press that and just follow those lines with my fingers. And the goal is to have no visible opening where you started and stopped here, and just manipulate everything, try and get it as straight as possible. Now if you like, you can actually glue base these edges in place. I think I'll do that. That just gives you a little bit more security when you're sewing this up. So just set that with the iron. So just set that one aside, turning this one right sides out. So this time I'm going to fold back this seam that we left along here and just give that a press first, and then flip this one back and line that up with the edge. Can you hear this rain here? Not sure if my microphone's picking that up. So now you can turn this right side out. Now once you're happy with all your corners and your little curve here on the bottom, you just want to make sure that your seams are brought right up to the edge here and that none of them are sort of still puckering onto the inside. So that means you just roll them between your fingers and just make sure that that seam edge is right up on that edge there. So I'm just going to play with this seam allowance here while it's still warm, and just tuck that up a little bit more inside still. When you're happy with how it's all sitting, just get your glue and baste those edges together. So now we're going to take both of these pockets to the sewing machine, and I'm going to top stitch down this diagonal edge here on the slip pocket and just across this notched edge on the card pocket. So now you're going to take your inner front and inner back combination that you've stitched together, and we're going to measure, I'm just going to flip this around, I'm left-handed here, 1/2 inch in from the left-hand edge and 1/2 inch up from the top and 1/2 inch down from the bottom edge. So just mark each of these with your fabric pen. Then we're going to take the slip pocket, we're going to align this bottom and left hand edge right on these lines that we've marked, and take your card pocket with the notched edge facing to the right and align this to the lines that you've got on the top and on the left hand side. Just do some glue basting to hold these in place. So just along the very edge of your card pocket here, just put a little bead of glue and then align that to those edges, and then just repeat that on these outer edges of your slip pocket. So make sure to do this along the very outer edge so that you're not going to glue your pocket to the cover too much. You're just wanting to glue that seam line here. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to top stitch around the outer edge of the card pocket here and along the top edge and the outer and bottom edge of the slip pocket. So now you're going to take your little piece of elastic for the pen holder. You're going to fold this wrong sides together and line up the short ends and just put a clip on that. Just set that aside. So now you're going to take your D-ring loop and you're going to press both of those edges into the center. Then just slide your D-ring onto your folded edges and fold them wrong sides together so that the raw edges are all enclosed. Then just grab a clip. You're going to clip these edges together. Now when we take that to the sewing machine, we're going to stitch 1/2 inch away from the edge of the D-ring loop here. I'm just going to mark that across there. So then you're going to take the closure flap and we're going to press that so the edges meet in the middle again. This time the interfacing doesn't go all the way into the seams. The way I like to do this is I like to actually glue these edges so that when we fold it all in half again, everything's just nice and secured. And then we're going to fold it in half lengthways. I'm just going to glue baste down half of this, and then I'm going to fold it so the short edges are meeting. So now we're going to take all of these to the sewing machine. So we're going to baste along the short edges of the elastic. We're going to baste along the mark that we've marked here on the D-ring loop, and we're going to top stitch along these 3 edges and baste along this raw edge for the closure flap. Grab your inner front, inner back and spine combination, and on the right hand side we're going to measure down 5 1/4 inches and place a mark. You're going to grab your closure tab and you're going to align the raw edges to the right hand edges and the bottom edge, align it just above that mark and clip that in place. And then you're going to grab the elastic and you're going to align that directly beneath. And clip that in place. Then you're going to grab your D-ring loop and you're going to place that directly onto the spine and center that over and just have this raw edges of the D-ring loop sticking out by 1/4 inch. So we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to baste all of these in place, and you might want to use a zipper foot for this because we're going to be ending up getting reasonably close to that D-ring loop. So just trim this tab off level with the top of the... So we're on the home stretch here. So lay your inner back and inner front right side up. And then we're going to place the outer back and outer front right side up directly on top. So right sides together, we're going to clip these layers together. So we're going to be nesting these seams on the spine. So put some clips along here, match up these corner edges. So now we're ready to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to be stitching these layers together. So make sure that you are following really carefully along the edge of the interfacing here, keeping your stitching nice and straight and just going really slowly around these little curves, corners that we have going on here. Now we are going to be marking along this bottom outer back here for a 3.5 inch opening. So I'm actually leaving this reasonably large here, because what we're going to be doing at the end is feeding the firm interfacing, or the Peltex, up inside the project so that it's going to have some extra stiffness. So make sure you leave this opening nice and wide here so that we can fit the heavy interfacing in. And just remember at the top of the seam to go nice and slowly across here, because you're going to be stitching quite close to that D-ring. So you just want to be feeling as you come up to it that your D-ring is out of the way and that you're not going to be hitting that with your needle. So I stitched this whole seam using my zipper foot, and this also helps as you're going along this edge where the card pockets and the slip pocket are actually pretty close to the edge. So if you found that a little bit tricky to do, try using your zipper foot for stitching along there, and it also greatly helps with where that D-ring is. So now I'm just going to trim these seams down, and just going to keep them long again over that opening. I don't want to trim across where my elastic and my closure tab are. So just before you turn it right sides out, I'm going to just fold back this inner seam again, and I'm actually really pulling on it. So I don't often do it exactly on the edge of that interfacing. I'm actually going to do it a little bit deeper than that. That just gives you an edge to work with, so that when you have pulled it right sides out, you can decide then where to go from there, whether you need to wiggle a bit more in or a bit more out. Okay, so now we're just going to carefully turn all of this right side out through the opening. And then just reach in as far as you can and push those corners out. Pull that D-ring loop out, and the elastic, and finally this last corner here. And this is where you're going to really go to work on your seams, either with your scoring tool or just the blade of your scissors that is shut, not open. Just going to scrape along the edges of those seams there, just shape those curves a little bit more. Just want a nice gentle curve. So then we're going to go to work and press everything. So I like to spend quite a bit of time doing this. I will press from one side and then flip it and press from the other side, and just work at it all until I'm happy with all my seams being nice and crisp on the edges, none of the layers showing through to the other side that I don't want. And sometimes I'll reach back in with my scissors and just wiggle a bit more so that everything's exactly where I want it to be. Now I'm also going to be looking at this bottom edge, and I'm wanting this to be as straight as possible. I don't think you should fuss about this too much. Just get it as straight as you can without spending too much time over it. So now we're on to adding the reinforcing to our project. So you're going to take your 2 pieces of Peltex, and what we're going to do is feed them in through the opening that we've got here in the bottom of the project. But before we do, I just want to check that this is the right size. So what you're looking for is that your piece of Peltex is 1/8 of an inch smaller than the inner front and the inner back cover. So if yours is a little bit bigger, you're just going to shave slithers off the sides of this until you've got it down to about 1/8 of an inch all the way around. It can be a little bit smaller because just depending on the fabric that you've used, yours might be a little bit skewy. So if you want, you can also just trim off some little corners on the side here just to help them of these rounded corners. So what I'm going to do, and if you've got fusible Peltex, it doesn't matter which way up you feed this in, either way will be fine. Just when you do the final press, where you have this in the project is where it's going to stay because it will fuse after you've pushed it all in there. So make sure you've got it where you want it, and if you change your mind, it's quite hard to get it out after you've fused it. So what I do to fold this, to feed this in, is to fold it and just feed it up through the bottom. I'm going to do the left side first. So as I'm going across, I'm opening it up and flattening it out. And depending on how big your hand is, this might be a little bit more challenging for you. But you can sort of get enough fingers up in there to get that corner right up into that top left corner, and then keep scrunching this up as you need to move it across, and then work it out until you can feel that it's nice and snugly up against those seams. And what I'm aiming for is I want to feel that it's not in this spine seam. It needs to be closer to the edge until I can feel that it's not sticking out into the spine. So just keep pushing it and wiggling it over until everything is flat, and you can feel that there is a little gap there along that seam. Everything looks nice. And I'll just have a check from the front. Everything looks nice and smooth there. So now I'm just going to just clip off a little tiny triangle off each of these edges, and I'm going to feed the second piece through. This piece is a little bit easier because it's just going to be straight above. Just tell it where to go. Get it right up in there. It's all right to scrunch up your project while you're doing this. You can feel that it's not in that spine. It's nicely up the top, and also it shouldn't be sticking out and making the bottom of your opening bulge either. So you should have a nice bit of clearance. So you're not aiming to necessarily get it right up into those seams, but you do want to make sure it's in the middle of your project. It's not in the spine, and it's also not deforming your opening there. So if yours is really wrinkled up, you can give it another press at this stage. So I'm just going to run a very small bead of glue, just get all my edges nicely lined up. So I'm just going to give this a quick press to set that glue. Now this is also going to fuse everything in place. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to top stitch at 1/8 of an inch away from each side, each inner side of the spine seam. And we're also going to top stitch right around the exterior of the project. So when we go along here, the aim is that you've got your pockets, if they're in the right position, you should have a nice gap to top stitch along here in the ditch between the edge of the pocket and the edge of the side seam. And also when we go past this pen holder, what I want you to do is pull this across. So the aim is to push this pen holder over onto the insert so that the pen is not sagging out onto the exterior where it's not inside the little folder when it's shut. So we're going to be stitching down here, and with this
pulled over. I'm going to be stitching along the top of that elastic and just holding that down and over onto so that it's on the inside of the little folder. So now we're ready to add the cam snaps to the closure tab and the front of the project. So let's just have a little look at the cam snap that we've got here. So we have a male part and we have a female part which has the little hexagon shape in it, and then we have two caps that hold each piece in place. So grab your ruler and your pen and we're just going to measure a 1/2 inch in and center a mark on that closure tab. Grab my awl and poke a hole carefully through, so just do it slowly to make sure you're not snagging your fabric. So I like to do this and give it a really good wiggle and just make sure that I've got a nice noticeable hole there that I can fit my cap through. So the cap is going to go through from the exterior or the outside of the closure tab. So just push that through, and then we're going to take the male part, which has the little oblong part sticking out, and just sit that on top, and holding it there, grab your tool. Now the cap goes on the flat black part, so it sits in there nicely. Just carefully close that around when you can feel everything's lined up. You're going to squeeze it nice and hard to set that in place, and just check that you're happy with that. So then I like to fit my notepad and my pen in here just to check where I want the snap to sit on the front. So this is slightly going to depend on how fat your pen is and whether you've got a little hangy bit on your pen. So just slide that into the pen holder there and close your flap, and then you're going to pull this over and just wiggle that pen into the pen holder there, and you can see how far around that you're going to be able to shut this. So to set the other side of the cam snap, we're just going to flip this over. So now this is our front. We're going to measure 1/2 inch in from this right hand edge and 4.5 inches down from that top edge. I'm just going to place a mark. Now I want to push my awl through this, but I don't want to be pushing it all the way through my pocket here. So I'm going to hold this out of the way, not majorly first, because if you sort of pull all this now, you're going to deform the layers here. So just start wiggling, just hold this down and out of the way a little bit until you can feel that your awl has come through. Just double check that it's not catching on here on the pocket side, and when you can feel that it's come through, then you can push the pocket out of the way and really hold it down there. And I'm going to pinch this really hard between my thumb and finger and give that a really big wiggle to make a decent sized hole there, and keeping the pinch there so that you don't lose the hole that you've just made. Feed my cap in from the inside into that hole to the outside. Make sure that's nice and down in there. Then grab the female side of your snap and push that on top. You have to hold everything there to stop it all popping off. So grab your tool. Now your cap is going to go on the black side. So just wiggle that through into all those layers there until you can feel that that cap is on that layer there. Now before you squeeze it, just double check that the pocket is not caught up there underneath, and I'm happy with that. And then give that a good squeeze and then wiggle that out from between the layers, and then just pop it shut, and that's looking really good. So you can take this and give this another press. Just make sure that when you're pressing it that you're not directly pressing this snap because you might melt it. So just be aware of that. So we're going to make the carry strap. You just grab your carry strap. I'm going to press under a hem, 3/8 of an inch hem, here on this end, and I'm actually going to glue base that while I'm at it. Then I'm going to press a hem into the center on each side of the interfacing. Now, one of my little tricks that I like to do just to stop these little ends from poking out here is to glue base these corners down, and rather than just doing them at 90 degrees so that they line up, just tuck that in just a little bit so that you've got a little pleat of fabric forming there, so that that corner is just slightly inside that seam allowance there, but those two little ends are going to be just pointing down inside that. And grab your glue again, and I'm just going to glue baste around this end and fold that all in half again. Hit that with the iron, and I don't know if you can see that, but all those raw edges are very nicely tucked inside there. You can go ahead and just press this whole thing in half. Now, another one of the little tricks that I like to do when I'm sewing a skinny strip is to just put a piece of paper bigger than this end just around the bottom of the end here, so that as your sewing machine is coming up to the end here, your feed dogs have something larger to grab. Or you'll often find it's quite frustrating because your machine will tend to just chew it and do lots of little unsightly little stitches rather than just feeding it through nice and straight. So I'll show you that on the sewing machine, and if you give this a go, let me know, because it is really cool. So after you've put the paper on there, you stitch over it, finish sewing, and then rip the paper out afterwards. So now just grab your little D-ring and feed this raw edge through the loop and fold it over by about 1 inch or so. Then we're going to fold the other end up to the D-ring loop, and I'm going to overlap that by, there's probably just over 1/2 inch. You can probably tell I love my glue, use it to death. So just put another little bit of glue on that folded end there, and then just fold this up. Get everything nice and straight. Now of course, if you don't want to stitch this, if you find this is too many layers for your sewing machine, you can actually punch a hole here and rivet this. I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch a little X shape on the end of that. And so if you want to put the paper behind this again, you can try doing that. You can also try using a zipper foot for this if you find that your foot is a bit bulky and struggles to get close to the D-ring loop. Okay, so now we're ready to load up our focus finder with a notepad. So just slide the cardboard back of your notepad in through that insert. Now grab a nice matching pen, because what is making your own stationery if you don't have everything matching beautifully? So slide your pen into the pen holder there. If you've got a rewards card or something that you like to take shopping, this is what this card holder is for. Just slide that in there. This little slip pocket is for receipts and any other little reminders that you might want to keep, or something that you can flap that you can think of that you might like to keep there. Then just shut your book there and grab your carry strap. If I can clip it on, there we go. So look how cute that is. Now if you've sewn along with me and made yourself one of these, give yourself a really big pat on the back. I hope that you have a lot of fun using this to write to-do lists, to write shopping lists, to plan your menus. This is exactly what I have needed to get my life back on track, so that I can be more productive and just feel like I'm accomplishing a lot more of the tasks that I want to do. So thank you very much for following along, and let me know what you think of this pattern in the comments below.